Oh, Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world watching this. Thank you for coming to this episode of Daily Cyber, episode number 274. Today, I don't have a guest on today. Just a few things and scheduling and challenges happen. So today's going to be an Ask Me Anything, an AMA episode. So ask me anything that you want. I'm going to cover some topics that I have been asked offline and then bring them forward because I think they're relevant topics where I'm getting asked, from other business owners, SMB, as I'm doing my advisory, looking at, how the industry is going on right now. So going to go through some different topics, but also I'm going to answer any questions from the audience, anyone that's live and watching right now. So, post your comments if you're watching on Twitch or YouTube, post your comments and your questions, and I'll be able to bring them up and answer them as I'm going. So today's gonna be a nice, relaxing episode. Again, I'm going to talk about some topics that I am being asked. Also, I'm going to answer some questions from the community. So let's hack at it. So it's been interesting. I mean, I think, one thing I want to just kind of give you guys a recap if you guys haven't been following me. I work as a fractional vCISO for several different organizations and helping with doing consulting. I've been in the industry for quite some time now, and it's been a journey, to say the least, from working on sales to instant response to, being rift from the organization that I worked at, and then trying to figure out, what direction and path I wanted to take, and then opening up my own business, which I had on the side. I shelved that, reopening that, and then starting doing consultations, working with clients, and really understanding the pros and cons of what I've learned from being in the industry, working with organizations, working with companies, doing advisory, and seeing the benefits and features and how they are successful in one area, and see other areas where I saw room for improvement, which I was able to take into my own business and be very successful quickly, thanks to what I learned and what I took away. So I think, my one takeaway, anyone in the IT security field, is to be dynamic, keep an open mind. Don't be fixed on, I am X, I am this. You are that in this moment. And as transitions happen, you take what you've learned from the organization, from people, process, and technology, and you grow. You grow into new roles, new opportunities. And I've been fortunate that some opportunities that have come to me have opened a lot of doors for me, from partners that I'm working with to a partner agreement I just signed this morning. Working on them, to one organization I'm working with, which is giving me a lot of exposure to different security programs, protocols, environments, expertise. So just amazing the opportunities I get, and being able to be on this stream to be able to share those with you guys. So what to look for, what to be able, the opportunities are out there, who to talk to. You're able to use the community as a network to be able to grow and make that career that you want to make. So some things I want to talk about today. I'm going to just kind of jump into a few topics that, if there's any questions that pop up. I got Net Fraser is my moderator. He'll chime in and just let me know. So one of the things I want to talk about, to start off with, is SME, the minimum cybersecurity essentials and requirements. I think one question I get asked frequently is, okay, hey, what do I need? I'm small manufacturer, small retail store, small healthcare, small financial. What do I need to look at? And one thing I want to talk about is looking and understanding your data, right? Because that's basically when you look at a ransomware, you look at an AC, a business email compromise, a network intrusion, a ransomware event. A lot of the times they're affecting either systems that have data around them, or they're affecting the data itself, where you're looking at encryption. So you're really looking at, how do you protect these people, process, technology, and these systems that are housing or working with data. So, and I learned this from Mike Milo, and he was great a lesson I took away from him was following the process of where the data flows externally and internally, right? And making sure you're securing that whole life cycle and that path of the data. So making sure you have, least privileges, or you have separation of duties on those areas where crucial or, confidential data is stored or accessed. Making sure you have like MFA, multi-factor authentication, and privilege accounts that are monitored and reviewed constantly. I mean, I've worked with several clients when you go through and they go through like a compliance and audit, to be from a third-party questionnaire or an actual, partner or vendor or compliance that comes in and does an audit. They get asked like, who's managing, how you're monitoring, what's your reporting, what's their change management process, if there's any accounts that changed, how are you monitoring all that, how are you logging it, how are you tracking it, like all these things that SMBs have to figure out and make sure they monitor that. You don't give access to everyone and anyone, and limit the administrative roles, right? And what I mean by is administrator is, technical administrator that have access to the systems, your servers, your applications to install data, making sure you lock that down, because if you can't measure and report on it, it's harder to track, right? It's a lot harder to track and have visibility to it. So if something does happen, you might not know. If a threat actor gets access to a privilege account, administrator with access, you don't have these controls in place. You might not know when they got access, how long they've had access, what activity they've been doing. So really locking down privilege accounts, right? Multi-factor authentication, separation of duties. Endpoint protection. You're going to hear a lot about EDR, endpoint protection, right? Endpoint detection and response is what EDR stands for. And you hear about CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, WebRoot, right? I mean, the list goes on. Carbon Black. There's two that I more favor, and the only reason why I do that is because being an incident response, you kind of see how they work from being set up in the environment with experts. Guys are doing a great job of doing it, and then what's happened in an event to the point where after, when you're looking at containment and remediation. The two that stand out for me are SentinelOne and CrowdStrike, and I've used them and worked with them as an incident response, engagement lead and a manager at that in the previous company, and saw how well they work to be able to contain the environment, evaluate, assess the environment, look at, suspicious or malicious activity, and then start to contain it, and then start to look at making sure the environment's secure so you can start to restore the environment, not have a secondary incident. So understanding the endpoint protection tool that you use and making sure you're utilizing it to 80 to 90%, meaning you have it, fully saturate your environment to any endpoint or every endpoint that it will install on. And if it doesn't install on a certain endpoints, like say it's a Unix or Linux system, say it's a certain virtual machine that doesn't deploy on, whatever that may be, you have other mitigating factors or ways of monitoring those systems. But trying to saturate the environment, which means basically installing as many systems as possible. I know when I was working in incident response, that was one of our goals within the first 48 hours, is to saturate the environment that's had an incident with SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, whatever that may be, so we have visibility, so there's not any blank spots, right? There's not any dark holes, things you can't really see any activity, that the threat actor is not on a system that we can't get access to, right? Or at least don't have visibility to monitor. So being able to do that, and then monitoring the systems, looking at your logs, looking at your alerts, tuning it, making sure that your exclusion, list is monitored and reviewed on an ongoing basis, going back through it, making sure if you set any policies in these endpoint protections, you're reviewing your policies, as frequently as possible. SMBs probably quarterly, at minimum, if not more, just to make sure they're relevant, they're up to date. You're looking at, threat actor feeds, or at least talking to security experts saying, hey, we're seeing this different type of, threat actor, attack. We're seeing these type of compromises. You might want to tweak your endpoint protection to monitor for these areas, right? You might put some new rules in, making sure it stays up to date. So privilege accounts, separation duties, endpoint protection. Next, I want to talk about backups. One thing I've heard and various of, I back up my data on a USB and we put it in a closet or a drawer to, I have USB drives to Veeam and backup solutions. I recommend the more critical your data is, the more critical your business is, the more mature your backup solution is, right? And it's not only that your backup solution is in place, but you're testing it, right? I know I had Andy Moss here before talking about restoring hard drives, right, from DriveSaver. And one of the things you never want to be in a situation is where your backup drives are encrypted, right? You try to reduce that, attack vector, that you have offline backups, air gapped, they're immutable, so they can't be written to, and you're trying to do that and secure them so that, knock on wood, it doesn't even happen. But we always say it's not when, but it's not if, but when. If it does happen to you, at least you can restore from your backups. Yes, it's an inconvenience, but your backups are viable, that you can look at them, scan them, make sure there's no malware, and then start to restore your systems. So making sure you have regular backups, you're testing your backups, you're monitoring, making sure that the backups are viable so you can restore from them. Patch management. One of the things, I've worked with all different size organizations, and I think patch management is something that every organization I've worked with so far is striving to make sure they have the best patch management program, because with all the applications, all the software, the OSs that are in the environment, from Microsoft to Apple to you name it, right? You're looking at all these different types of, software solutions that majority of the time, unless they're end of life, like you're talking about Windows 10, need to be updated and patched. There's security patches that are constantly coming up. We've got Patch Tuesday for Windows. You've got all these things coming out that need to be updated, need to be patched, and need to be secure, right? Especially as you go from external facing, and I'm going to give you guys a little pro tip here. Anything that's external facing takes priority to be patched. So you got your external facing servers, maybe even external, like you have remote like desktop solutions. Some people use them, that they have desktops they remote into. Any of these that have external access should be hardened first. So you should patch first. Then you work your way back into internal. And you should work from external, critical, important, medium, low, and then next is internal, critical, important, medium, lows. So that's kind of the areas that you still want to look on patch management, and you want to look at servers first, and again, it's external. Then you look at desktops, laptops. Then you look at, smart devices. Is it important to know recovery time objective and recovery point objective for various business functions? Yes, it's important to know, especially when you're looking at business continuity and disaster recovery, right? You want to know how long it takes. And I'll give you an example. I worked with a client, I did a tabletop exercise, right? And we went through this process, and they were looking at the recovery time objective, recovery point objective, and they thought their backups, the recovery time objective for their backups to have the data available, which should have been 24 hours. That's what they understood. But when we went through the tabletop exercise and I had their vendor there who was supporting their backups, they ended up telling them, no, that's 24 hours for you to make the request for us to now start to work on extracting the data into an actual physical drive, and then we have to ship it to you. So you're not going to get it to you until 3 to 5 business days. They're like, hold on. What do you mean? You said we would be able to be up and going. Your solution would be able to help us restore our backups, or help us restore from our backups within 24 hours. They're like, no, it's actually looking at exporting the data from our storage, our storage data center that stores it in immutable backups and immutable, as well as I just ran a blank. Immutable as well as offline, I'll call it. Air gap. So air gap and immutable. And then what happens, we have to bring them back, spin them up, and give you access, and then bring the hard drive. That takes 24 hours. So they were like, hold on. Like, that's not acceptable. We have certain SLAs, things that we have to get up, and we have to get these critical systems up in 24 hours. So they had to look at their recovery time objective, recovery point objective, and reassess that. So to your question, it is important to understand your critical systems the impact on those critical systems, and you look at two sides. One, the impact of losing money, loss of revenue, financial cost, right? Implementation of cost, like do you have to pay for a vendor? Do you have to pay for a supplier? Do you have to pay consultants come in? Is it costing you $5,000 to $10,000 a day if you're down? So you have to look on both sides, and you have to look at what's the acceptable risk in between that, and how long can you be down for, right? And then you're going to create, controls as well as remediation strategies on how can we remediate that or have failover so that doesn't happen. I'll use an example. We talk about hot sites, warm sites, cold sites. Well, if I know my system's down and I have an option of restoring from backup or creating a warm site or hot site that converts over within 15 minutes, half an hour, I'm technically not down, but I'm paying for that. And here's the cost. I'm paying for that hot or warm site or even cold site to be up, and for how long. So I have to look at those cost analysis and seeing what's viable, or is it okay for me to be down for a day or two, 3 days for this example, and get that back and go up. Because if I'm down, and I'll use an example, if I have a dog groomer and I'm down for 3 days, yeah, it's loss of, grooming dogs, say I groom 10 dogs, 12 dogs a day. I'm down for a couple of days. I might lose $5,000 to $10,000 maybe in grooming fees, right? I can be down with that because I'm going to restore from backup. I'm going to get my backups from, some solution. They're going to send it. I'm going to be able to do it. I'm going to be up and going. That's not a big deal. But if you're looking at you're losing $50,000, $100,000 a day, that's a different story. So you have to look at a cost analysis too. Is the control in place cost effective relative to the actual incident, right? So, and I'll use the example. If the control is $5,000 a day, but you're losing $100,000, 100% company should invest in it. Now, if you flip that, if the control is $100,000, but you're only losing $5,000, it's not worth it. So that's why going back to the recovery time injector, recovery and point injector is extremely important to understand, especially around your critical systems, right? Critical systems and processes to be able to maintain the business. So we talked about MFA, EDR, patch management, backups, and then cybersecurity awareness training. You guys are all aware, trying to keep security front of mind with all individuals. So what happens is as we get through different types of attacks, especially when you're looking at, and I'm seeing this more and more with smishing, text messages as well as email. These are getting better because I'm sure they're using ChatGPT and any AI technology to help with, grammar, spelling, even looking at some of the text messages that I receive, I can tell they're targeting me. So I'm just probably online. They're asking about certain things. They're talking to me about jobs in cybersecurity. I have a vCISO opportunity. And then when I ask them certain questions, it doesn't come back. So I get ones, and I'll use an example. I get ones right now that are saying, hey, we're recruiters from Indeed. I'm like, okay, I don't think Indeed is reaching out to me to ask me for or ask to hire me. So I ask them questions like, that's great. Show, what's your position? How long have you worked with Indeed? Okay, what's the position in the description? And a lot of times somewhere there it breaks down. Right, I'll do a kind of an open, source intelligent look, LinkedIn, search the Google, whatever that may be, and just say, does that person work for Indeed? And then a lot of times I won't find it. I won't find that individual, and then I know it's a scam. But I'm using that as an example. They're targeting people on specificity of their interests and what they're doing. So be mindful. It might sound interesting, but if you didn't request it, it's probably not valid. Right? It's probably someone trying to get you to give information, click on something along that line. Next, I want to talk about is vendor management. So why are vendors are demanding detailed security questionnaires? So I'm seeing this more and more. Right? A lot of times when I first started in security, you would get questionnaires from insurance, a few different vendors. It'd be anything from 8 to 12 questions. I've been working on vendor questionnaires where they're 50, 100, 300 questions, right? And one I've worked with was about 400. And you're answering a lot of detailed information. And on top of it, what they're asking for is actual proof, artifacts, screenshots, policies, in a lot of times with the policies, I tell people, do a screenshot of the table of contents, right, of the policy, because again, you don't want to have your policies out all over the internet. But seeing this, the question a lot of these SMBs and business people that I work with are asking, why am I having to provide this? And I said, one of the things I'm seeing is the third-party liability and downstream liabilities become more aware. It's become more industry standard to be aware of. We have to look at all partners. We have to look at all access points. And if our third-party vendor is working with us, our data, our systems, our people, we have to now make sure they're secure, because if they're not and they get compromised, they might have direct access to us. Now, it could be a direct connection to our environment. It could be access being they have key contacts. So if they get, their email gets compromised, they can start doing phishing campaigns, which looks like a valid email. And I'll use this one as an example. Say Joel, and you guys know Joel from when I used to do streaming. Say Joel has my contact information. I trust Joel. He's, one of my friends. Or even Neil. I'll use Neil in this example. Say, for example, Neil sends me an email, but I didn't know he got compromised. Sends me an email. Hey, look, Brandon, I love your stream. You're doing a great job. Click on this link. There's a new way of streaming. I want you to click on it. Neil sent me that. The likelihood of me clicking on it right now is probably about 85 to 90% because it's Neil. I know Neil. I trust Neil. He's going to send me an email. He's asking me to do that. I'm probably going to trust that email. My security mind's going to go, I'm going to text Neil, hey, Neil, did you send me an email asking me to click on this new streaming application? And that's going to be my verification. Now, if I want to go one step further, I'll call Neil. I'll phone him and say, hey, Neil, you send me that link. Can you give me some insight? What are you looking at? Do you really like it? He might say, yeah, I really like it. I've been doing a lot of research on it. Or he might come back and say, what link? I never sent you anything. So then it validates that, okay, hold on. That's potentially, Neil, your email's been compromised. You need to reset your password and go through the things, your due diligence. Check your send folders, check any rules, make sure there's nothing been happening, but just be aware. Which brings me back to, that's why I see a lot more vendors now doing their due diligence, asking more questions, because the downstream liability of them, their partners being compromised from another partner has increased. So they're now asking more questions, and they're being more mindful too of, how is their systems and data being protected? So I'm not getting asked a lot of questions about encryption, data storage, data at rest, pen testing, compliance, SOC 2, type 2. I'm just trying to think of anything else. Of course, your security controls, endpoint firewall. Do you have DLP, things along the line? Do you have a mail filter, proxy? Kind of the common things you'll see in these questionnaires, but they're very detailed, and they want to see screenshots and artifacts of them. And here's my personal opinion of why they want to see if you're managing them properly, because there's going to be ones where they ask you for a screenshot, and they're going to ask for logs. They're going to configuration, and if they see configuration 2010, right, and it's 2025. They're going to go, okay, hold on. Do you not review these at least annually to go through and make sure they're up to date, they're the right configuration? Because there's got to be changes in the environment. There's got to be updates. Things have changed monthly, daily, yearly, some of these security configurations. So haven't you done your due diligence and gone through it? Don't you audit your own controls? So something to really think about as you're going through and you're looking at compliance and regulatory, third-party management. Now, for SMBs and small companies, if you don't have a third-party management program in place, I highly recommend talking to someone to say, okay, what do I need to do to assess my current vendors, right, my partners? What questions do I have to ask them? Where do I, catalog that and manage that properly? When do I go back and review them, right? And then, how do I validate that they're the right partners for me? Because it's no longer about business to business relationship. You do X, I do Y, we should work together. That's great. There's that area in the middle that now you have to look at security, right? You have to make sure the relationship is secure and protected for both parties, not just from your partner, not just from yourself, but both of you guys are protected, because If it is, then you guys will have a great business relationship, you'll be able to grow. But if there's ever an incident, now the question becomes, oh, now you've been compromised. Which brings me to my next topic I wanted to kind of go over is instant response. Now, speed versus strategy. So I'm going to take a pause there for a second. What do you guys think when he looks at instant response? Do you lean more to speed or do you lean more to strategy? I think it's an interesting topic too, because I have an opinion of, because I was instant response, because I worked on different incidents, there's a relationship here between the two that I feel needs to be in place to be effective at instant response. So here's my personal opinion. So I wanted to give you guys a minute or two to see if you guys had your own opinion. I think when you're setting up your instant response program and you're looking at tabletop exercise, your instant response plan, your policy, right, your run books, right, I totally agree with strategy. I also agree that you run that strategy in an incident, but I believe this: you have to be effective of doing that so you can be efficient and do it quickly to be able to respond. So there's an element of speed because you're able to contain the environment. And I've worked with some great clients. I'll give an example. I just finished an executive incident response program with a client. We went through, reviewed their policies, updated their policies, made sure that they were up to date from business continuity, disaster recovery, incident response, went through it with the team, saw some gaps, did some modifications, got everything, tuned up, went through training of an incident response, life cycle from when they've detected incident to getting their insurance on the phone to being in front of, counsel, breach coach, insurance, getting scoped, all the way to debriefing from the incident. So if you look at the incident response life cycle, do that whole thing. Went through the training, answered questions, got them to date, made sure they were ready. And then we went through a tabletop exercise. Went through that, gave some recommendations, some areas where they need to improve. About 60 days after, I'll say roughly 45 to 60 days after, I got a call that they said, hey, we had an incident. We wanted to go and debrief you about it. What I heard from them was something I was proud of them, so proud of them. They were able to get alerted and contain the actual incident, right, within 30 minutes of the actual alert. So they're able to investigate, go through their due diligence on false positive, false negative. This is a real incident, contain the actual system, lock it down, keep it up to disable the network card, keep it contained, look at the external environment, block certain IP addresses. They did all that within 30 minutes and contained the incident where they saw there was artifacts that this could have been a ransomware event. Right? So they stopped in 30 minutes a potential ransomware event, which I'm extremely proud of them that they were able to be that efficient to be able to do that. And that's, to me, where speed comes in, is because they had the right team, the right monitoring, the right investigation to be able to do their due diligence and to be able to spin up the security incident response team to now make the call. This is what we need to do. And they ran the run book. They knew what to do, how to do, who to call, what's the process and the strategy. Contain the system. Don't shut it off because they want the memory to be able to, if they have to do any forensics investigation, so keep the system back up, but disable the network card. Scan the environment, see if there's any other suspicious activity. Look at external IP addresses. Look at geo blocking. Like all that stuff they went through. Hearing what they did and be able to contain that, and they're saying, look, compared to other incidents where it was hours, if not days, we did this in 30 minutes. It was a huge win for me. And that's something I recommend when you're looking at instant response, is making sure you go from start to finish. Review your business continuity plan. If you don't have one, do a risk assessment, understanding what's your critical systems, processes, and people in your environment. Write out a business continuity plan. From that business continuity plan, do a disaster recovery policy and plan. Then from there, making sure your incident response policy, plan, and run books are up to date. Then I'd recommend going through a tabletop exercise, from start to finish through all that. And then making sure you look at different scenarios, real world scenarios you go through, test that, and then make sure that in that controlled environment, it's what I call as a stress test. The person that's doing it is not prolonging the incident. It's like, okay, so what are we going to do? Okay, what's next? Okay, you got to meet with your counsel in 15 minutes. What's going to be our response? Let's go. Like, and keep that pressure on, because that is no different than what you would deal with an incident, with the communication, being able to respond, be able to start to take action, be able to talk through the actions that you're going to do. I'm going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to look at containment. We're going to look at our Sentinel-1 or CrowdStrike logs. We're going to go through this. We're going to look at our firewalls. We're going to extract all these or export all these logs from firewalls, from Sentinel-1 and all that. Get them so when our forensics teams ask for it, they're ready to go. Like that checklist that you're going to go through. And I'm just throwing out examples here, but this checklist should be in your incident response playbook. That now it's just check. But you're able to be so efficient with it. This is what we need to do. And I think the important thing with that is that if you run that over and over again, when you come to an incident, there's not the confusion. There's not the stress. There's just, we know what to do, run the incident response run book, and let's go. Let's go and make sure we have this contained. We have the things we need to. So the question is, were they able to stop it before it affected backups, such that they could just use their backups? They were able to contain it they actually contained it to an endpoint. So this organization I'm talking about, they saw the suspicious activity start to alert on Sentinel-1. They got the Sentinel-1 alert. They looked at the false positive, false negatives. They found the endpoint, which is was a laptop. They found the one that was starting to communicate, and there was the issues. They used Sentinel-1 to disable the network card, and they contained it right there. So there was no concerns of servers, backups, anything like that. They contained it before the threat actor could do, download any payload, start to move laterally, anything along that line. So good question, but yeah, they didn't get that far. Let me know if you guys have any other questions on that. Next thing I want to talk about, and I want to go into a little bit high level. I think there's different thoughts and opinions on this, but AI and deep fake phishing threats. I'm starting to see, and I'm sure you guys are seeing this as well, and I'll use this as TikTok as an example. I'm starting to see more and more videos, right, of like gorillas and star troopers and things like that, when you're starting to see they're using AI to be able to create the visual videos. Well, and then some people are actually getting the videos and they're taking a screenshot or just letting the AI read their face and then being able to use their face and the audio and start to create videos in their tone, their voice, and then which their imagery. Now, I'm starting to slowly see, I was talking to Afghani about this last time, is that I'm starting to slowly see that people can now start grabbing videos. So someone might be able to grab my video from YouTube, take a screenshot of my face or a snippet of the video, start to play with it, render it out, start to put that in AI, start to look at the voice, start to look at typing out text and in voice. All right, and then you can take a soundbite from any of my videos that are online or my podcast, utilize that, and now do a deep fake of me. Now, this is my Generation X mindset, right? You kind of look at, hold on here, with social media and all that, like everything's out there. Like people are out there, people are talking, people are online, right? We're talking and going through this. It's so easy to get people's content, right? And likeness, the snippet of their audio. I mean, if people are out there, they're able to do it. Now, there's other things too, like something I've been warning more elderly people is be careful, when you answer the phone, because what happens, they're taking recordings of, people's voices, taking that snippet, putting it through a digital audio interface, right? Edit it in, put some text to it, now it sounds like them, then calling their bank, their service provider, whatever that may be. And now it sounds like them. They're answering the questions that they might have did some intelligence on them, some social engineering, or found online that, when's their birthday, what's their address. Now they're answering their security questions, and now they're into that environment. So something I really be mindful of is just looking at different security measures that you have for your family, right? And I'll use an example. You should have some sort of security password for your family, right? So if I call, a family member and say, hey, I'm in Costa Rica right now, I need $5,000. We had running some problems. I had some health issues. They're asking me to pay. My family member should be asking the password that we have as a family to validate that's me. If I'm not able to give that, then they know it's a scam, right? Even though it sounds like me, it has the same cadence, they're saying the right things. I want to make sure that they have this password that they know it's not me. Because we've heard stories, and I'm sure you guys have, is where people get calls and say, hey, John's been in a car accident. He needs medical attention. They're saying that it's going to cost us $20,000. Can you help us out? We need to get the money. We'll need to make at least a deposit. Can you send us some money? And get people in a panic state. So they have to make a decision. And it sounds like them. It's going to be them. And then you hear stories where people say, okay, let me call you back. And they call the individual. And the individual's like, no, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with Johnny. There's nothing happening. What happened? I got a call. It sounded exactly like you. You're saying that we needed money. So be very mindful of how this is going on. And then, like I said, password for colleagues, friends, businesses that you guys know and share amongst yourselves. 2, be due diligent. Don't answer the phone if you don't know the phone number. Right? Let it go to voicemail. Right? If it's someone that text them, call them back. When people start bombarding you with, and this is something a little bit harder, right, to be mindful of, but something to think about. If someone calls you in a stressful state and it's like putting pressure on you, take a breath. Take a stop. Even if you have to hang up, right, and call them back, do that. Don't get in the same state they are, because you'll answer things you normally wouldn't. You'll say things you normally wouldn't say, right, because you're kind of in a stressful state. So you're in a fight or flight. So you're going to respond, right? If you in a calm state, you're more sympathetic. You can kind of go, okay, so what's this about? Sorry, who's this? And what's going on? Right? And then you can be able to decipher, yeah, this is just a scam, and just hang up, right? And if it's real, right, then you deal with the situation. And this goes back to security maturity across the board. Now, MFA, make sure you have MFA on all your accounts, any personal accounts or business accounts. I'm going to get on a little bit of soapbox here. Make sure you have a password manager if you have a lot of passwords, right? You can use passphrases, right? I'm seeing more and more people using that, but don't use the same passphrase over multiple sites, right? And platforms. It's going to be harder as you start going. You have, like most IT security guys have 30, 40, 50, 100 sites there they have passwords for, right? And having the same password phrase for one. Well, here's the thing. If that password phrase is on a site that gets compromised and that passphrase gets out, and that's the only passphrase you use, and now that threat actor can go through and start testing them in others, and all of a sudden they start to pop your other accounts, your security is pretty shitty. Let's just put it that way. All right. You need to have different phrases, different security for different platforms, different solutions, different technologies, logins, because again, you want to be secure. And that's why I recommend having a password manager. Now, my soapbox is I was using LastPass thinking, okay, they got compromised. But the encryption didn't get breached. The passwords are still secure. But over the last year or two, I found their support was just terrible, right? Updates and things like that. LastPass wouldn't work on certain devices. What was I using on? I can't remember. It was conflicting with another device. I'm like, okay, you know what? Like, guys, I logged a ticket. I just have a question. I'm not even asking like to reinstall and uninstall and doing all that. I'm just a question. Is there a bug or something that I need to know of? And it took me weeks to get a response. Like something they could say, yeah, there's a bug, or no, there's not. It might be something on your device, so you need to look at updating, whatever. It could have been a quick fix. So eventually what happened was my wife's account got locked out. Don't know why. She had her master password. We had it secure in another password manager. So we had it. She was trying to log in, and all of a sudden it stopped working. And they're like, "Yep, you're out of luck. Sorry, you made a mistake in the password." Like, no, she's been logging up until 12 o'clock, same password, and all of a sudden now it's saying the password doesn't work. You have to reset it. Go through the reset process. It says you can't reset it. Logged a ticket. They're saying, yeah, no, you got two choices. Either one, delete LastPass completely and start from fresh, or just delete it and stop using LastPass. So I said, all right, we'll stop using LastPass. All right, so I migrated over to another password manager. But if you use LastPass, and still like it, that's great. I would recommend staying away from it. Just their support and what they've been doing over the last little bit with it hasn't been something that would meet my criteria for looking at a solution to be able to provide someone. So I wouldn't recommend to my clients or people I work with. I know a lot of organizations that are starting to look at password managers are shying away from LastPass because of the support and what I deal with as a vCISO advisor. I wouldn't recommend LastPass, or I wouldn't recommend anything else except them. Which brings me to my next topic, right? Is vCISO life. It's interesting as I'm going through my journey from sales to instant response to advisory to running my own business, kind of going that 1, 2, 3, 4. And I was in IT before as well. I think one thing people have to understand, vCISO or being a CISO takes a certain mindset, right? One, you have to be calm in the storm. You have to be the one that when things are blowing up, people are upset, stress is going on, you have to be the calm in the storm. You have to be the one that has the level set head, asking the right questions, making sure you have the process in place, making sure that you're driving what needs to be done, be it security controls or policies, documentation, or the incident, whatever that may be. You have that right mindset. 2, you have to be able to debrief and let it go. I know when I was working with instant response, there was incidents that would keep me up at night, to be honest with you, because you're thinking through it. Could I have done that different? Could I have said that differently? Was there something that we missed in that incident, right? All these type of questions where I'd wake up at I'd go to bed around 12, I'd wake up at 3 and just thinking through it. Well, as a CISO or vCISO, you can't do that. You can't burn yourself out. You got to be able to debrief, let go, and then keep moving on and learning, right? You want to learn from it, of course, but you want to debrief and move on, right? You don't want that to hold on to you, right? It's lessons learned. Something I learned from a few people now is that a lot of these times when you're dealing with an incident, it's not a failure. It's an opportunity to learn. Like, what did you learn from it? Did you learn that the policies were in place, the controls were in place, they weren't reviewed properly, that you didn't have the right team that was managing? Like, what does that mean? And then how do you improve that? What are the changes you need to make? Right? That's, for me, is the mindset of a CISO and a vCISO. How do you fix that? And what's your timelines? Like, how quickly can you fix that? Right? Is it critical systems, critical monitoring that you need to fix that like immediately? You need to have the right people, or something that over time and distance you can start to implement, right? You can start to look at, okay, I need to have these in place. I need to make these changes. Like, and I'll use an example. Policies and documentation. Totally agree. They're a necessity for business, but they're not the key thing that protects organizations from the technical attacks. It's the security controls. Security controls take precedence versus if you have to write a policy or harden that control. Hardening the control takes precedence, right? Time and time again. And that policy needs to be pushed out a little bit so you can harden that control. To me, that's the right way to do it, Right? If someone says, hey, I have to write the policy first and make sure the policy is up to date, but the security control has gaps and it's protecting our critical systems, that's not the right way of thinking, right? You've got to protect the environment. It's like, for example, say my apartment, my place here. I know, and I'm not saying I do, but say I live in a bad neighborhood. There's been shooting, there's been robberies and all that. And I have to write a policy for my insurance that, I'm concerned this and that, versus getting locks and cameras for my doors and getting a, steel cage in front of the door. I'm doing that before I go and update my policy time and time again, because then I'm more secure and I have more time to do that. So making sure you have that, the right mindset, the right focus, making sure you're thinking on two levels. As you grow as a CISO, there's two mindsets you need to have. You have to understand the business and you have to understand the actual technologies, security, IT, your security controls, the infrastructure. You have to understand both. And you have to be able to be collaborative on both sides, where I've seen the challenge of being combative on one of the other sides. Combative with the technical team. You need to get this done. Like, this needs to be done right now. Like, what are you guys doing? Combative on the business side. You guys are not doing this. You guys need to protect the business organization. You don't know the liabilities and security risks and challenges that we're going to run into. Either way, you're combative or adversarial on one side, you're not going to have any benefits. The better way to do this, in my opinion, is to come in curious. So what have you guys done so far? What have you seen that has worked and what hasn't worked? And the things that haven't worked, what were the challenges? Okay, what can we do to improve? Technical team, senior leadership. Okay, what's on your priorities right now? What's critical for the business? Are we concerned about risk and liability? Are we concerned about these, systems going down? Getting those understandings so you know how to talk to them and be a partner versus an adversary. Because it's interesting. I talked to a colleague of mine and we're talking about, what's the difference between being a manager, a director, or executive? And I said, one of the big keys is the relationships you have with your team as you grow up. As you go from manager, director to VP to, C-suite level, it's to relate. One of the key things, and there's other important aspects of those roles, but one is the collaboration you have with those leaders that you work with, because it's stressful enough as you move up in that levels, at that level of position, to manage the business, take liability, look at the risk, understand the financial responsibilities to increase profits, reduce, costs, doing all that while protecting the business, while keeping it growing, while helping with the shareholders and making sure they understand, the board understands the growth, and you're keeping in line with them. Like, all these aspects, they don't want someone that's going to be combative in that relationship. They want someone that's going to work with them, that's going to be supportive, right? And is in the same fight that they are in, right? To make sure they're doing that. And that's, as you get into the CISO role, you understand that. So you understand it's not about my opinion. It's about how I can work with them to make sure we all get what we need to move the business forward, to help to protect the organization, to reduce risk and liability, to help profitability, to do that. And then can we work together collaboratively in a structured time? Meaning, is it project plan that we have, that's going quarter to quarter? Is it annually? Is it, over the next couple of years? How are we doing that as a team that we can keep improving the business? Now, there's going to be some organizations you're not going to be aligned with, and that happens, right? Those are organizations that might not be a good fit. There's other organizations where I've worked with where it's amazing. It's an amazing relationship, because the respect that you have for each other and what each, C-suite, role is responsible, and what that individual is focusing on, and being able to support them in that just creates a strong relationship. So when you need something for security side and say, look, I need to start looking at, and I'll use the CFO. Say I've been helping the CFO working on the budget, making sure that, everything's, balancing out for my department, going through that. And then I go, hey, look, I need to do my budget right now and look at, my procurement for next year. Can you help me kind of look at what are our costs over last year? What are our costs of quarter? What we have, what's kind of the spend I'm going to have for next year? Where I'm going to allocate? What am I, what's my OPEX and CAPEX expenses. Let's kind of work through that so I understand that. So I have a forecast of my current budget and what I'm doing, and then I can forecast what I'm going to be using for next year or what I have available to me, right? And what I can convert from Q4, say it's this year, Q3, Q4 to Q1 of next year, right? And I can start moving that forward to the next year's budget while looking at security. The next things, okay, so we talked a little bit about the vCISO life and security and kind of that and the business mindset. The other thing is, one thing I know a lot of VCs are doing more now is self-care, working out, eating right, taking care of yourself, taking breaks, not burning yourself and running 24/7, right? Having that work-life balance is important because you got to come at a high level, right? When you come into a meeting, when you come into an organization, the level of knowledge and expertise that they are expecting you to have is pretty high. Now, sometimes you're not going to know things. You're going to bring it offline and say, look, I'll get back to you. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to go back to each meeting and be on point, answer questions, listen, document, take action, or even start creating plans and strategies to help that organization start to work on that next level. But if you're tired, you're fatigued, you're stressed, you're overwhelmed, you're not feeling well, you're not going to be present. You're only going to be 50% there, right? And that's not going to help the organization. That's not going to help yourself. And then what you're eventually going to see is you're going to get to a point where you burn out. So making sure you take care of yourself, you exercise, you sleep properly, you work out, right? You go for walks, you de-stress, right? You have areas now. Something I recommend for people, and I did this for a while too, is you have like someone that you do debriefings with. Could be a therapist, could be a colleague, could be whatever, but someone you talk through things that you're like, okay, that's bothering me. That's kind of on my mind. That's been affecting me. I'm finding that I'm not able to release it, or I'm kind of stressed about that. Having someone that's an outlet that you can talk to that either one can help you level set or just be a sounding board for you to make sure that you are de-escalating and you're able to be present with your clients and being able to work through things, I think is key to being a very successful and maintaining a career as a vCISO or a CISO. Just looking through to see if there's anything else I missed. I'm going to add something on here for the vCISO life. Making sure you work on your soft skills, meaning you're listening, you're questioning, right? And question mean answering good questions to understand, not to accuse. Like, why did you do that? Why is that there? Those things, when you look at those questions, will put someone in a confrontational state. Then you guys will get in debate, and that's not what your objective is. Can you help me better understand why was that implemented? That's a better question. My first time watching, I have a question, but it's more business related. I've spent last 5 years working mainly technical position. At the start of the year, I started in a new company where I'm slowly being introduced to audits such as ISO 27001, SOC 2, BSI C5, etc. I'm thinking about starting my own business as a side job, as a consultant. Where would you begin if you had to start over to make yourself visible to companies? And what would you do to make sure you are prepared for it? Okay. This is great. So because you're being introduced, I've worked in last 5 years working mainly technical positions. So you're being introduced into compliance, regulatory, security frameworks, right? Compliance, controls. I would spend at least 5 to 6 months and try to master the process and what's being asked, right? When you're going through an ISO 27001, what do you have to collect? How do you collect that documentation? What's the questions that are being asked? What's the artifacts? How do the systems, what systems are going to be assessed and what systems are acceptable not to have, right, in the environment because of the size of the organization, right, or the type of organization. I'll use an example, software development lifecycle. Sometimes what happens is some of these compliance and regulatory ask for, hey, do you have a software development lifecycle policy, a process? Well, they don't develop software. They don't do coding. They don't do any programming, nothing along that line. So that's not part of it. So sometimes you need to know, will that fit the questions or requirements that they have for certain compliance or frameworks? is that relative to their business? So you need to know that. How is all that collected, documented, the timelines? How do you submit that? Working through that whole life cycle, when you understand that and you can document that yourself, then I would start looking at doing it for other organizations, right? And I start looking at being a consultant of small organizations, saying, hey, are you going through a SOC 2 Type 2? Are you going through, trying to think, OWASP for programming? You're going through ISO 27001. You're going through NIST. Trying to think of the other one. There's a one for the government. There's a government compliance. I'm running a blank, but there's one for the government that if you're running through these, you want to make sure you understand the process. You understand how to document. You want to understand how to collect artifacts. You want to be able to advise them on how to do that. And then you want to make sure you can actually defend when things are not applicable. Like, for example, software development lifecycle. I've been asked by many different auditors, well, hold on, you didn't provide that. You didn't provide a software development lifecycle policy, run book. You don't have that. What do you use? Waterfall or do you agile, or what type of programming do you do? We're like, we don't do. This organization doesn't do any, software development or programming in that sense. So that's not applicable for us. Oh, have you ever done in the past? No, we've never done it in the past, or it's not current in the future of this business because they do this, this, and this, right? They're a retail business and they have a proof of a point of sale unit. They have inventory, they do that, but they don't develop software. I'm using that as an example, but you have to be able to defend it. So that's where I would start. The next thing is when you do these, you want to know the time it takes, because as you're advising clients, you don't want to say, hey, I can do an ISO 27001 and it takes me 5 hours. When you have to do an initial assessment to see where they are in comparison of being able to be audited and get their certification. If they haven't done anything, they don't have any security controls, it could take you 18 months to get them up to speed to be able to do that, from security controls to policies that they have to write to training and education. It could take you 18 months. Well, and you're saying it's going to take me, 5 to 10 hours to do it. You're not aligned. You don't understand what it takes. And that's why I say, go through this a few times, right, with the organization that you work with to understand it, because it's really about that hands-on knowledge of what's it going to take to be able to be compliant, to go through this, to answer those questions, because that's what they'll want from a consultant, right? Not to figure it as you go, because they're going to be paying for your time, right? And that goes back to understanding how much time and understanding how to bill your clients. Are you charging them $80 an hour, $150 an hour, $200 an hour? What's that right ballpark that meets for your demographic of client? Because you might get an SMB and say they're doing ISO 27001. They haven't really started. It's going to take 18 months and they want to work with you for 4 hours a week. That might be like $125 an hour type engagement, right? And you're looking at, okay, that makes sense. But if you just went and charged them $500 an hour for an SMB, they're like, yeah, we can afford that. Doesn't make sense. So hopefully that answers your question. I know we covered a lot of great information. I want to thank everyone for coming out, and a lot of great questions you guys have asked. Just so much going on in the industry. Just make sure that you're staying up to date. You're asking good questions. You're keeping connected to the community. You're really kind of looking at what do you really need to do to be an expert in your field and your area of cybersecurity. And there's many different areas, right? Many different areas of cybersecurity to get into, right? There's no one perfect, career path. You can be a consultant. You can be an advisor. You can be compliance. You can be in, MGRC, which is managed governance, risk, and compliance. You can be in threat hunting. You could be SOC. Like the list goes on and on and on. All I recommend is stay consistent, stay learning, be curious as you go through, and then you'll just keep growing your cybersecurity career, and it will go and like slow. And as you start to become more of an expert in your area, it'll be like a hockey stick. So I want to end this daily cyber to say thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate you hanging in there with me. It's episode 274. I'm really excited to share my knowledge and experience. So don't forget, Software's hackable. Being connected is vulnerable. I'll see you next Daily Cyber.